And anytime I go to a developer and say, here's the problem, but it's so complicated, it's going to be so hard to fix, they just say, I mean, it's technology. You can do anything with technology.
Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts. My hope is to share with you not only valuable insights and knowledge from leaders in education, but have fun while doing it and shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Often, as a teacher using educational technology, I had frustrations about its uses in the classroom, the functionality, and even its purpose some days. But I loved trying new things and never shied away from a new tech tool. There were years where tech tools did feel more cumbersome than helpful, though. I wish I had known our guests at the time to discuss how to make technology work for me, not against me. Today, I am so excited to share our guest, Emily Rose Berry, or ERB, as we call her around here, who is the VP of Product at Branching Minds. Much like many of our guests, her journey also began in the classroom as a student, wondering how learning worked. Our conversation covers her accidental journey to her current role and how technology can assist educators to do their job better. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Today on our podcast, we are excited to welcome Emily Rose Berry, the VP of Product here at Branching Minds. And we're excited to hear all about her Branching Minds journey and just all of her knowledge around educational technology. So welcome.
Thanks, Larissa. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like I'm in the cool club because I got to do the podcast, the best podcast on Spotify.
Well, I always knew I had to have you on because you are described as fun. And so this is a fun podcast because we, schooling around.
It is fun. And I'm so excited to have fun with you.
Yes. Well, welcome. We are kind of just having conversations around the Branching Minds story and even just the people here who work together to transform education and just are on this mission together. And so I would love to hear sort of how you came about being a part of this team and just a little bit of your background.
Okay, fabulous. How I came to Branching Minds was completely intentional. How I ended up working in software product management is the most hilarious accident. I know there are people who kind of set out to have this as a career and kind of knew this was always what they wanted to do. And I am just simply not one of those people. I always think back, like if I could go back to myself 20 years ago and say, psst, you're going to be working in software development, I would have laughed and said, what are you talking about? So I went to college. I got a degree in journalism and I really wanted to be a book editor, and my dream came true. I got a job as a book editor right out of college and I thoroughly hated it, Larissa. This is where you and me, like our paths kind of like.
I was going to say, it isn't like the movies, right? Like, the movies about that book editor who's like walking through the streets of New York and they get to do the dream.
It's not. No, it's a lot of time in a cubicle reading by yourself. And I liked the reading. I liked working with writers, all that part of it. But I realized pretty quickly that if I wasn't able to talk to people during the day, I was going to lose it. So I got out of that pretty quickly. I actually I got a job working for a startup in Buffalo, which is where I'm from. Go Bills, always. And I was working when people ask me what my job was, I would say, have you ever heard of SurveyMonkey? I make the surveys. So I was like a survey editor. And it was this brand new field. at the time, we won't talk about how long ago that was, for assessment for colleges in student affairs. So the newest hot thing on the street was, asking students about their experience. Like, this is not something that we used to do, right? And so as part of this job, I got exposed to just the general concept of assessment. And it was the first time that I thought back and I said, you know what? When I was in school, now I've always loved school. I've always loved learning, loved being a student. I was like, how did teachers know I was learning? How does this assessment thing fit in? Like, I just never thought about it on that meta level before until I was exposed to this concept of you can check in and get feedback from students and you can find out how this is going from them. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, this is this whole other way that education is done that I didn't even know about. It's like the science of education, and that was really intriguing to me. So from that experience, I actually said, I think I want to go back to school and become a teacher, which I did. And I taught at every grade level. I taught reading, writing, and literacy. I was a high school English teacher. I worked in an alternative school in a suburb here in Buffalo. And then I worked in a city school. I worked in a charter school. I was a substitute teacher. I got a job working through AmeriCorps at a local adult literacy nonprofit here in Buffalo called Literacy New York. And I was helping design tutoring programs for one-on-one instruction for adults who were struggling with reading skills. I taught at the college level. At one point, I had, like, my youngest student was 5 and my oldest student was in her 80s. And it was just this beautiful, like, I'm seeing that whole spectrum. And the one connecting thread for me in all of those experiences was, I don't know how it worked out that I got to do all of these jobs that were so connected, but it was all about getting to know a student on an individual level and helping them with what they needed. And assessment was always the entry point to that. So it was this just beautiful journey of, I got interested because of the way assessment can help you dig in and understand individual student needs. And then I had all these beautiful educational experiences where I got to do that. And there was one that it always felt the hardest, and that was in a traditional classroom. And that was where I struggled the most. And I said, I don't know if this is going to be what I'm cut out for, because it is so hard to find the time, the energy, the resources, honestly, the support to actually get to know each student on a one-on-one level when I'm trying to prepare them for the state tests and all of these other pressures that are going on, not to mention the pressures my students had, themselves in their lives. And so it was when I was teaching at the college level, one of my friends from that startup in Buffalo called me up and she said, hey, it's winter break. We need help with some surveys. Would you come back just for, a couple months? And I said, sure. And that's when I learned about software and, like, the business of education technology. And I was just so inspired, because I think, when you're a teacher and you're in the classroom and you're spinning your wheels and you're trying so hard to make that impact, it's really, really hard to see how you can make an impact outside the realm of those 4 classroom walls. You can go into administration, but there's a lot, even, that just the pressures of all of the compliance and regulation and all of these things that, it's really easy to lose sight of what it's actually supposed to be about. And once I got exposed to software development, the coolest thing I learned was that you can do anything with technology. And when I started talking to actual, like, software developers, engineers, when I eventually moved into the product space, and it was like, we're having this big problem. Our customer's having this pain point. There's this issue in education, and these are really big problems. And anytime I go to a developer and say, here's the problem, but it's so complicated, it's going to be so hard to fix, they just say, it's technology. You can do anything with technology. And I was like, yep, that's it. This is the spot for me, because that's the kind of energy I need to get me through the day, So I absolutely love it. So that was all a big mistake. Obviously, I was supposed to be a book editor, but I've never looked back since I found product management, because this is the best job in the world. No offense to you, because I'm pretty sure you also think you have the best job in the world. But
I do think that. But I
let's fight about it.
I love that, like, you really got into it because you were intrigued by assessment. Like
Yes.
that idea about how do we measure and find out more, and like that, how that question like drove you to like start a different part of your career. And now probably so much of what you do, you can lean back on that experience as a teacher and think,
Yes.
how would this help me do my job better? And I think that is,
100%.
as a former educator, I often, with different solutions I've used in the classroom, I would be like, do they even get what teachers go through? Like, do they even understand why I need that button right there to, I don't need to click through this. And then, yeah, I often think that perspective is so valuable for an ed tech solution, or just in technology in general for people who are
Oh
using it. So
boy, what teachers go through. That could be a podcast in and of itself. There's an idea for a future episode. It's true. You can't understand it till you live it. And of course, I'm somewhat removed from the classroom now, which I'm always very cognizant of. I mean, the classroom has changed so much since I've been at one.
I think even in the last 3 years, like I think about, I had 3 years in the classroom, but like even 6 months out, I don't know what teachers are dealing with, this year, right? Every year is different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I get it.
The kids are different. The challenges are different. The technology kids are using is different, which honestly affects everything about the classroom. It's really hard to keep up with. So we try to be super intentional here within our product team of trying to stay connected to actual practitioners as much as humanly possible, and do that outreach, have those conversations. We don't want to be designing anything without having a real understanding of how somebody's going to use that at the end of the day. And that really helps stay connected. Even it's helpful to have that experience to reference back to, but like you said, it's different now for sure.
So tell me more about how you came aboard the Branching Minds ship.
Oh, the Branching Minds ship. Yes. So I thought for a second that maybe I would not want to be in education technology. And so did a momentary experiment where I tried to make different kinds of products. And that again, it was like the 8 months in the cubicle. It took about 8 months outside of education for me to say, nope. That's where my heart is. It really, really is. And I found the right thing for me, and I need to stick with it. And then when I found Branching Minds, this was like this magical moment, because we were talking about assessment kind of being the entry point into education for me in the first place, which is a bit of an odd one to begin with.
Yeah,
I will admit.
a little bit. Yeah. You don't really hear a ton of teacher going, I love tests.
Oh, the minute I saw a rubric. But really, the minute I saw a rubric for Larissa, it was like, oh my God, this is how they knew I was learning. I hope. Again, not all. I did go to school in like the 90s. So it was a lot of, I don't know. I feel like you did well on this here. You got a 95, but there's like this whole science, and going to grad school and learning about how you can actually do like good quality assessment and progress monitor and just check in and get feedback. Like that's totally my jam and what I loved about being in the classroom. And so coming here and learning about multi-tiered systems of support and the way that these systems can be designed so that teachers don't have to do that heavy lifting. I was just thinking back to myself and my sheer woman power in the classroom, trying to assess every student in every area, not even academic, social, emotional needs as well. My students had so many of those, and I just felt like I was on my own of trying to figure out, how do I check in, understand, use that information in a systematic way, find the right resources to help them. And it was exhausting. And I frankly don't think I was very good at it, because I was a baby. I was in my early 20s. I was just trying to figure it out, and I didn't feel like I had a real support system behind me. It was just me on my own. And then I learned about Branching Minds. I learned about MTSS, and I was like, well, that's the answer right there. Why isn't every school doing this MTSS thing that I've never heard of? And I can help build software that's going to support that type of a system for teachers. Okay, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. That was a no-brainer. It was easy peasy to make that decision. So that's kind of how I ended up at Branching Minds.
Well, and I think that understanding how the MTSS framework really does benefit teachers in the long run, and how when you build it as a framework, not just as a one-off kind of initiative or something, I think it can have over long term can really impact the efficiency or even just the sustainability of changes that teachers want to make. Because I think that in the end, it's like, I can work really hard for like a year to do these things, but if this isn't going to make an impact long term, it feels like you're spinning your wheels and you're like, well, what did I do all that work for?
Right. And good
so,
luck next year's teacher, because you have no information or insight as to what's been going on here, Yeah. So many of the core problems of education are quite nearly solved with a multi-tiered system of support, I guess, in theory, on paper. And of course, we know, turning that into an actual practical system that's running every day is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So I think MTSS is magical. I don't think it's the magic bullet, because we still need to put a lot of systems, processes in place to make it work. But that's where technology is supposed to come in. Right? Especially when we think about education technology, and it can do so many things, but like, what are the most appropriate roles for tech? And I do think it's in helping pull those systems together. That's a core belief of mine. And so that just aligns perfectly with what we're trying to do here at Branching Minds.
Yeah. So speaking of what we do here at Branching Minds, for you, as you're part of this team, what about the Branching Minds mission resonates most with you?
So our mission, and I feel compelled for whatever reason to read it now, Larissa, just to remind us of what it is. But our mission at Branching Minds is to empower all educators to effectively, efficiently, and equitably, love those 3 E's, support the holistic needs of their students, and to create a path for academic and personal success for every learner. So if I was to kind of zoom in on a particular part of that is really resonates with me, it would be the success for every learner part. And I think that's just, I don't want to repeat myself. It's a lot of what we've already been talking about, but it's that every learner. And it's so hard for one teacher to be able to meet every single learner where they're at without some type of support behind it. And I remember when I was in grad school, I took a class and I was learning about differentiated instruction. And I don't remember if it was the teacher I had or the book we were reading, but this concept of like, we want to make sure that all students are invited to the party. And in order to do that, you have to understand what their entry point is and how they want to approach the material, as well as what they've learned already, what their foundational skills are, what's going on at home. All of these things is, you really have to know all of that if you are going to create a learning environment where every single student walks in and says, I am able to succeed in this space. And it's too much to ask of one person. It's simply too much. And so that's the part of our mission that I think tech is the most useful for. I think it's where we have the most impact. And it's what I believe every teacher should have behind them as they walk into a classroom.
Yeah. Well, it's just that extra lift. Like, it's somebody that's going to help carry the bags in, or like, I think, well, I hear the word lift and I think, oh, it's that person that's like, here, let me give you a hand, and like makes it just a little bit easier to do your work. Because we get like, education is hard work because you're helping people learn and grow, but it could just be a little bit easier and not as overwhelming, because that just helps you feel more successful in what you do. And then, then you want to keep doing it when you feel successful. So
for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So you, having worked with technology or product development, ed tech solutions for a while, for you, in your experience, what has really changed in the last 5 years or however long you've been in technology? I'm just curious as far as your experience.
So much. I've been in ed tech for over 10 years, which is very hard to believe. I cannot believe how much has changed in that amount of time. So just for a frame of reference, my first ed tech job, which I mentioned happened like right out of college, where we were doing these survey assessments, we were doing this super cutting edge thing called mobile data collection. And mobile data collection at that time was we would load through USB cords surveys onto PDA device. Do you remember PDAs, personal?
Yeah.
What were they? I don't even know what PDA stands for,
Like
but
Palm Pilots.
Yes, these giant, they were these big, giant devices, and we would load surveys onto them and we would mail them to colleges and universities. And this was cutting edge, Larissa. It was like everything, like because what it meant was you could take the PDA or the Palm Pilot out onto campus, and you could find students in the union or the library, in their natural element, and you could get some data, on the spot. And this was something that really wasn't done. In addition to the fact that, before I was working with this company, nobody really bothered to do this type of assessment of students anyway in the first place, right? So I'm just saying this is where I come from. This is my roots. And so to fast forward to today and look at just even that element of it, what is mobile data collection today? Oh my gosh, just a world of difference. So honestly, the differences in the hardware have made tons of changes in the types of software that we develop, because now we have almost an oversaturation of opportunity to collect data in a mobile way, right? And so what was once a new landscape, I guess, to think about the ways we could use tech to gather feedback from students, we have now gone fully on the other side, where it's almost like no one wants to give you your information for any reason anymore, right? It's like, if I get one more survey in my inbox, I'm going to lose it. And so we now have the other side of the coin, which is, okay, how do we balance all this? Like, we went kind of crazy there and just thought about, where can we get the data from all the students all the time? And now we need to think of them more mindfully as consumers and our customers, honestly, to say, I want to be thoughtful about when I approach you and ask you for information. And I want to make sure I actually need it and I'm actually going to use it, because we went through many years where we were just sitting. And when I say we, I mean education technology companies and institutions of learning were just sitting on all of this data that they had asked for and never used. And so this creates like a whole trust thing, of just why am I constantly engaging with all of this technology and giving over all this information and all of this data, and I'm really not seeing how it's being leveraged in any meaningful way for my own personal outcome as a student. And so now that we're on the other side of that, that's something that we have to think about. We have to think about, not only because of, all the developments in thinking about student privacy, for one thing, making sure we're being good stewards of student data, but also we should only be collecting data that we have a plan and an intention to use in a helpful way to advance student outcomes. It felt to me for a little while there like we had maybe lost our way in that sense. We being both vendors, technology companies, and buyers at the institution or school level. And so now I think it's very much about making sure that we're very intentional about data collection and the purchase of software, and we're only implementing technology in a way that it's actually going to lead to a greater outcome. And we have evidence to show that, right?
Yeah. Well, and that makes a lot of sense, because I think that there for a while it felt like, ooh, this is this new shiny technology. Let's use this and let's use that. And it's like you gathered all these tools, but they're collecting dust, or they aren't being used in the way that they're intended to use, and you're overwhelmed. And I know as a teacher, like there were years where it's like I was being thrown all this new technology, and I'm like, okay, but what is it that I really is going to help me do my job? And is everything else just extra? That is a good point of just like really being very purposeful in how and what we use, and that it really impacts student outcome it should be a priority.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge I don't use the word challenge in a way to say like it's hard. I think it's a challenge that education technology companies need to rise to say, we're going to be more intentional about how we market our software, or we're going to think when we're doing our planning for feature development for the year, we're going to keep in mind those outcomes that we're actually trying to have, and try and build things that we truly believe are going to move the field forward and make teachers' lives better, make it easier for them to do their jobs, and ultimately improve student outcomes. It's very easy to lose sight of that being the ultimate goal when we get a little bit, in techie speak, hung up on innovation, right? Sometimes the most innovative thing is just the thing that solves a pain point and a core problem in education. Like that, it doesn't have to be necessarily the most exciting and flashy. It just has to be something that when a real practitioner looks at something that we developed and they say, oh my God, this is going to make my life so much better.
Is that your favorite thing that a customer could say?
Are you kidding me?
That makes my life so much easier.
I'm going to like cry even just thinking about it. I have become very emotional when I get to that point, because that is basically my barometer of success for myself personally. Right. Is because that's supposed to be why I'm in this in the first place. So yeah. Even if it's something that seems so silly and so small, it's what we're supposed to be doing at the end of the day. So
yeah, I can relate to that. I spent time as an instructional coach, and sometimes my job was, I just wanted to make the job of the teacher just a little bit easier. And whether that be found a great resource, or I used to do Tech Tip Tuesdays, and I would send out like technology that I would find or software, or I would make a tutorial video about something. And my favorite email back was, oh, this makes my life so much easier. Thank you. And so, yeah, I get that.
I bet you were a great partner to have at your school district. I would have loved that.
did. I always was the kind of person with technology that I just wanted to try anything. I went, well, let's see this work. Like my first year of teaching, we had laptop carts, and they often collected dust in a closet. And I was like, this brand new teacher, and I'm like, oh, laptops, like, why are we not using these? And so I'd pull them into my classroom, and I used Moodle, which I think is still around, as like a LMS, and set it up for these 7th graders to use. I mean, it was a total hot mess, but like, I didn't mind troubleshooting and like figuring out how to make it work, because it was fun to try to see if it would work in the way that I'd want it to work, and different technology. And so I loved, and I like often piloted things for my school, because I was like, sure,
early adopter.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, because I know that like there's a lot of aspects of the things that we do here at Branching Minds that we know that impacts students and teachers. But for you, how do you think that your specific role, because sometimes like people will be asking like, well, you're not in the classroom anymore. Now you're in technology. How do you see your role impacting students and teachers?
Well, there is my, wishes and desires. Does it work out this way every single day? I'm not 100% sure, but if I was to boil down what role I think I have in this process that has an impact, it is just about translation. So it is impossible for software developers, who are, by the way, some of the smartest, just coolest. If you've never taken a moment to sit down and talk to a software developer, let this be your call. They're just really, really interesting, the way their brains work and the types of knowledge that they have. I never had an opportunity to really understand how the software development process works, or like, what are they even doing when they're doing the beep boops, sitting down at the computer. I'm serious. When I came into this thing, like, it wasn't what I intended to do. And so I had to learn a lot on the fly about how software development actually works. And they're so smart, and they can do anything, but where they will fail is when they do not have an understanding of the actual core user need. And so there are lots of ways that you can do software development to get that translation to them. And, there's lots of like requirements writing where you can write out the recipe, A, B, C, D, it should do this and look like this. And when you press this button, this exact thing happens. And you could pass that off to a development team and they'll take it and they'll build exactly what you asked for. But there is this magical connection of the brain of a software developer and the brain of a practitioner, a human who's just trying to do their job and solve their problem, that if they can be of the same mind and understand that problem on the same level, what the engineering team is going to produce is going to be a million times more powerful than what you could have predicted or written up as the recipe. And so where I think product comes in, or what I've just loved the most about being in this type of role, is making that connection and providing the opportunity for us to not only define what the product needs, but really understand the core problem. And in the case of education, that means learning a lot about the field of education. And it's not just my role, it's the role of product managers and UX designers to really like provide that connecting thread and the translation that's needed so that what comes out on the other end of that development process is exactly what somebody needed. Even better if it's like, I didn't even know I needed that thing, but holy cow, thank you. Right. And, without a product department in the middle, it's hard for that to be done in a way that's efficient and effective. So that's where I look at our kind of like core mission or responsibility to the organization is. And I do believe that if we're doing our jobs really, really well, then the direction of the technology that we're developing for education, which is not going anywhere, we're going to keep making new software all the time. I think we're the ones who help make sure it goes in the right direction and then it's guided by best practice. So
I think that I probably didn't fully understand the role of product either. As you explained it, I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense to me in my brain.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think it is anyway. I think if you interviewed 10 product managers, they would all tell you something different because it's a really multifaceted job. But that's where I kind of go back to in terms of like the days where I need to ground myself in what I'm really here to do. That's what it is for me.
Well, Emily, like I have enjoyed this conversation so much and learned a lot from you as far as product and technology. And I'm very thankful to work with you. So our last question here on the podcast is often a silly one, but it is one that I think brings us all together. As most former educators and people who are involved in education, what is your favorite school supply?
I love this question. I got to tell you, when I saw it on here, I was like, oh yes, the school supply question. And then I had to think about it for a while. This is actually a very complicated question for me, Larissa. You wouldn't expect it, but I have a complicated relationship with school supplies, and I'll tell you why. They're very expensive. And when I was growing up, it was a really stressful time when we had to buy all the school supplies and, make sure that, you have like the cool folder and not like the lame one color folder. And then when I was teaching, it was so hard for my students to get all the supplies they needed together. And then I was spending all my money on school supplies. So, but we won't get into all of that. My favorite one at the end of the day has got to be those smelly markers. You know what I'm talking about, right? Those
no.
markers.
I know. Of all the school supplies I got rid of, my smelling markers are still in a box.
You got to keep them just to get a whiff of that grape every once in a while. I mean,
I loved it when teachers would use those because I thought they were a really fun way to like just, I don't know. I always like, when the teacher would give them out, everyone would want to like smell the right. Smell the grape. It was usually the grape. Yeah. That was the most
grape's
popular.
a good one. Cause here's what it is. Learning is a sensory experience. You got to engage all of your senses in that process. And it is so hard to fit smell into the classroom. And those smelly
good
markers
smell.
figured it out. Yes, a good smell. Oh, dear God.
I taught middle school, so, smells. There were lots of different kinds of smells.
You're taking me back in a bad way.
I also love this question because, some people, we answer this as like our current day school supply. And then also as a kid, like what your favorite school supply was. So this is a great answer though. I think smelly markers are underrated as an important school supply.
All right, now, everybody, if you have those smelly markers at home, go get a whiff of that grape for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And it was just a pleasure.
Thanks, Larissa. This was the best.
Thanks for listening to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to hear all our future episodes. As well, if you're enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and let us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @BranchingMinds.